Gardening naturally will return.
See.
Pruning to a single stem allows me to get much more fruit in a small space because I'm growing my plants vertically. But if I'm going to grow them vertically, I have to support them. And so the first step is to put up these wooden plant supports, which allow me to tie strings to them and then train my tomato plants up the strings. Now, the best way to attach them to the string is to use one of these little plastic clips. They come with teeth on there that hold onto the string, and so when I put that on there, it won't slide down, and then I move it over and I put the tomato stem through the main hole. It's important that you put these on underneath a branch rather than underneath the fruit cluster, because as the plant gets heavy, it is going to rest on this to support itself, and any resting to support itself underneath the fruit cluster might cut off sap flow and you'd get fewer or smaller fruits. Now, you can get these clips from any tomato supply catalog, but if you aren't able to get them, there's another old technique that works just as well. And in that case, as the plant grows, you just wind it around the string, and the friction between the string and the stem of the plant supports it. So my next step here, you can see how it's come up, is to just carefully take the plant, bend it around like that, and now I have one more turn around the string, and this is supported for another week or so. Whichever technique you use, pruning tomato plants to one stem and training them vertically will get you earlier, better, and cleaner fruit. Another popular tomato staking method is to plant them inside a cage of concrete reinforcing wire. Now this one is about 18 inches in diameter, and where the edges came together, the wire has just been bent over to hold it like that. You can stand them upright, and it has nice large holes you can reach through and pick the fruit. Now on this large commercial scale, these stretch off into the distance, they have attached them to a wire along here to hold them upright. What I do on the home garden scale, just drive a stake in next to them and tie them off to the stake. You don't have to do as much pruning for this as you do for the single stem method, but you have to do a little at the start. And what you do is, after you put the plant in, you prune off all the suckers at the lower part of the stem up until the sucker that's just below the first fruit branch. From there on, you let them grow. And what that does is it keeps the lower suckers, which would grow out this way, from being out and getting in your way. The higher ones will grow up inside the cage. Now, if you grow them on the single stem, as I showed you earlier, what you get are earlier fruit and larger fruit, but fewer of them. This method gives you a lot more total yield, and it's actually a lot less work.
Somehow, there's always too many tomatoes. Many more than I can eat before frost. Now, in past years, I used to can all of those, but lately I've been drying them. They take up much less space when they're stored, and they give a really delicious pungency to sauces or soups, or even put on pizza. Now, there's a number of ways to do it. If you live in a warm, dry, sunny climate, just spread them out on screens in the sunshine. That's what they do in Italy. But in our foggy Maine climate, they wouldn't be sun-dried tomatoes, they'd be fog-mildewed tomatoes. So I use this electric dryer. Now, if you don't have one of these, you might find you could get hold of a solar dryer, or even use your oven if you can turn it down well below 200 degrees. I usually set this at 115. It could also go maybe as high as 140, but you don't want to scorch them. Just turn them on, and maybe 8 hours will dry those. Now, we found that the best type of tomato to grow for drying is the Italian paste type, like this La Rosa, which has done very well for us. And the simplest way to handle them is to just cut them in half like that and spread them out on your drying trays like this. That's the simplest way. But I found an even better way is to peel the skins off first. Now, this batch was plunged into a boiling water bath for 60 seconds. And as you can see, I can now slip those skins off very easily. See this, how easily that skin just peels right off? There. Then what I do is cut it in quarters, and with my thumb, I get rid of some of the juice and pulp and lay it down there like that. It's a little more work, but it cuts your drying time in half, and that's good if you're trying to save power. That's all there is to it. Now, how do you know when they're done? Well, they shouldn't feel sticky anymore. You can dry them till they're slightly leathery and soft like this, as long as they're not sticky, especially if you want to soak them in olive oil like that. Or you can let them go to a crispier stage and then just reconstitute them when you're ready to use them by pouring a little boiling water on top. And boy, are they yummy.
As a tomato lover, I am in hog heaven. Behind me is the trial ground of Johnny's Selected Seeds in Albion, Maine. And there are 300 different tomato varieties there for them to look at. And the selection is impressive. Now, for the average person, this is what tomatoes look like. But when you have 300 varieties, now you have some choice. Here's a beautiful little one called Matt's Red Cherry. It's actually much more of a currant, and look at the beautiful way they hang on the vine. Here is a large red one, doesn't even have a name yet because they haven't figured out whether it's better than what they have, but it sure looks beautiful to me. A lovely little white one called Sun and Snow, and I tasted these. This has a flavor you wouldn't believe. And even a larger one called Great White, beginning to have a little red coloring in there. If you want more of that, here is Striped German. Look at the color in there. Wouldn't slices of that be spectacular in a sandwich? Here's another one with no name. It's just called Workshop Number 2. It's a little paste tomato that they're developing, and I'd grow it just for the beauty alone. Wouldn't that look nice hanging on a plant in the garden? And a second paste tomato. No, it's not a pepper, it's a tomato. This one's called Sausage, well named, and it's just filled with good tomato flesh for making tomato paste. Now, this seed house does a lot of work with heirloom varieties, and this one's called Lillian's Yellow Heirloom. I've tasted it, it's spectacular. I know darn well why Lillian has been saving that one so long. You want a pretty one? Here is Tiger Tom. Look at that lovely coloring. It's almost something you ought to frame in the kitchen and aren't even going to dare to eat. Now here's a famous one, Prudence Purple. A nice large one, fantastic color. You cut slices of this and it'll make a memorable platter. And you want them even larger? This is Persimmon, about as spectacular a large yellow tomato as I have ever seen. And last but not least in my selection in there is Brandywine. And many people feel that this is the best tasting tomato ever grown. Hi, Barbara.
I just found the most delicious yellow cherry tomatoes over there. I don't even know what they're called.
Well, this is almost tomato overkill. And before I take out my knife and start slicing these and the juice starts running down my chin, I suspect it's time to say goodbye and good gardening. With wires in it, it's connected back to a thermostat, and the thermostat has a sensor that is inserted into the soil in the flat. And you can set it for whatever temperature you want. We have this one set at about 70 degrees because that is the ideal germinating temperature for the crops that we're trying to start here.
Now, not all seeds like to germinate at such a warm temperature. Some of them as low as 60 or even 55 degrees.
Now, most of the time, as soon as the crops have germinated, we will take them off the heating pad and move them to another part of the greenhouse. But some of the real heat lovers, and especially in our cool climate, the pepper plants and the egg plants, we leave on here, because that 70-degree bottom temperature will grow us just about as nice seedlings as we could possibly want.
And don't forget those great little tomato plants over there. That's one of the secrets of our early tomatoes.
Now, this greenhouse is a lot more elaborate than the ones I started with many years ago. In fact, those I made myself from off-the-shelf parts very inexpensively. Things that I sort of invented at the time and put together in the backyard. So come on out in the backyard and we'll show you how to do it. Before you put up a greenhouse, the most important thing to think about is where you're going to put it. And the most important ingredient in that is sunlight. Now, I'm standing out here in a perfect spot to put a greenhouse. It's getting sun all day long, very much like you want in your home garden. But your home garden is there in the summer months, when the sun is tracing a much higher path in the sky. And you have to think about the fact that the greenhouse is going to be used in fall, winter, and spring, months when the sun is much lower in the sky. So when you're choosing that nice sunny spot, make sure that there aren't trees out there that when the sun is lower are going to block the light. Growing in here are protected against the worst of the elements out of doors. Now, when people first started making greenhouses, back in the old days, they were very expensive items. In fact, some of them were designed to be quite some architectural palaces, and they were definitely not in the average gardener's budget. But things have changed now. With a polyethylene plastic cover, which is very lightweight, lets in plenty of sun, you can now have a very inexpensive greenhouse. All that polyethylene plastic needs is a simple frame to support it. I bought this greenhouse as a kit, bolted it together quite simply. It has straight walls and a straight roof. Looks just like a house. Many people like that shape. And these straight walls are just square pipe. There happens to be a curved piece, bolts inside very nicely, bolts to the roof piece, and that gives you a very strong rib. Connecting the ribs are what is called a purlin. And this is bolted in, the ribs are 4 feet apart, and now the whole frame is very solid. This house probably runs about $600. But this isn't what I started with. This is what I have now, and it's very nice, but years ago when I first started putting up little greenhouses, they were much simpler, less expensive, and very mobile. And I'll show you how I did that. I first put up a greenhouse using 20-foot lengths of half-inch rebar for the structural support. If you use a 20-foot length of anything, even though you're going to poke part of it into the ground to anchor it, you can make a very nice 12-foot wide hoop structure that's tall enough for you to walk in. Now, I learned from that. The surface on this is a little rough. It abraded the plastic. So what I now do is put black plastic water pipe over the rebar, and that gives me a little more structural stability and also a smooth surface. I cut this 18 feet long and tape it on because I want a foot to stick out here to put in the ground. Now I can put that directly into the ground where I want the edges of the greenhouse, but I've also found it works better if I put a pipe with an interior diameter slightly bigger than this half-inch in the ground where I want them to be. I measure the 12 feet between them, and I measure the 4 feet between this rib and the next rib. And I lay it all out. Then I put the ribs in place. Sometimes it's somewhat of an athletic event, but after you've done it a couple of times, you'll find that it really isn't that difficult to manage. After you get it up in the air like this, just put your foot against that point, and then you can direct it right into the pipe in the ground. Follow it over. Carefully, you don't want it to bend too much to where you have your other pipe set 12 feet away. And you can put this right in there. And now you have your first hoop. And that gives you a nice stable greenhouse hoop that you can walk under. Now there are other materials that work also. This is 3/4 inch electrical conduit. It comes in 10-foot lengths. Easier to handle maybe than that 20-foot length. And I put this together with another electrical conduit piece, this 45-degree angle connector. Stick one in one end, one in the other, and I now have a 20-foot length. I put it up the same way. Drop the end into a pipe foundation that I've already put in there, and the other end on the other side of the 12-foot space. What's nice about this is that you now have a Gothic arch. Many people find that a lot more attractive than the round arch. This isn't as stable as it is with the rebar, and if you want it stabler than that, if you live in a windy site, you can take 10-foot lengths of rebar, stick them inside these. You'll find that 10-foot length is easier to work with than the 20-foot length we put up there. This would be a simpler technique for somebody who wanted one. You want to get these well seated there. That's well seated now. You don't need to glue them because the pressures on it are not going to pull them apart. And another nice feature about not gluing them is when you take this down, which you can, and move it, you're not stuck with hoops, you're left with nice straight pieces. Now, that's a pretty nice greenhouse, but it's missing one thing. The purlins that connected the ribs on that one, how are we going to do that here is with a piece of rope. rope is put on with a clove hitch. In order to make the clove hitch, you take the rope around your hoop once, and when you take it around the second time, you put it back through the circle you created, and as you pull tight, that gives you a hitch that holds on there, whether you pull in either direction, and then you just slide that to the top of the hoop. Take the other end down and tie it off to a stake here on the ground. Now I can pull against this and I get the beginnings of a stable greenhouse. And I continue doing that on each of the arches in turn. And I finish the last one. Now every time I put one of these in place, I'll take my tape measure and measure between the two ribs to make sure I have the same 4-foot distance at the top as I do at the base. And I just pull the rope over and come down, tie it off to the stake, and I have a nice stable greenhouse. Sometimes I would like to pull it even tighter to make it more stable, but if I do that, it tends to deform the ribs. Well, there's a way around that also. You take another piece of pipe, cut it to length, and then slip the rope through it. And this will give you a solid end piece that has other advantages, as you will see when we start putting plastic on, than just giving us a stable end here. Now, when I pull this tight, I have a way of tying this around here, and now we have a nice solid piece all the way along there. When I cover this greenhouse with plastic, I'm going to bury the edge of the plastic in this trench. And I'm going to demonstrate that with this small piece of plastic for two reasons. First off, covering a greenhouse with plastic is a job for two people. And second off, it's pretty windy today, and it would be very difficult to do it. If you want to have some idea what it feels like to be the rope holding a sail on a sailboat, try and put plastic on a big greenhouse on a windy day. The plastic is going to come over the top and come down and be buried in this trench that I've made here. Dig the trench, put in the plastic, push back the soil, and stomp on it. And it goes all the way along the perimeter of the greenhouse. Now that's pretty straightforward. Nobody has too much trouble understanding that. But the difficulty comes in figuring out how to close off the end, because we've changed our shape. The way you do that is to use this pole that we put in to stabilize the greenhouse. This plastic will now come, the edge will be buried along here, and then when it gets to this pipe, we use a special clip. This is a little C-shaped or U-shaped clip that's made specifically for clamping plastic onto a pipe like this. Just slide it over and push it into place and it holds it tightly. They're called garden clips. And you can make a lot of nice little structures with them. Open them up, slide them over the 3/4 inch pipe, and they hold the plastic tightly. The plastic coming in from the other side can also be clamped on. What I usually do with a house like this is bury one edge, and this edge I attach to a board that I can hold down with rocks, and then I can unclip a couple to open it up for ventilation or to go in and out. About as simple and straightforward a greenhouse you could want, and best yet, about half the price of the more complicated greenhouses. The ends and the bottom of this metal frame greenhouse have wood attached, and that gives you a place to secure the plastic. Now, the simplest way is to nail another little wooden strip into that with the plastic in between. But that's only the first step, because if you only have it that way, the plastic can pull back under pressure and pull out from those nails. You need to double it. After you do that, you need to fold it back over and then put a second strip on that secures it in place. The other option is to purchase with your greenhouse metal plastic locking strips that are designed specifically for the purpose. There's a strip that's attached to the greenhouse, and there's one that comes over it and holds the greenhouse plastic in between. For example, it's right here, held on by thumb screws. You bring the plastic down, get it good and tight, and then slip this second piece on there, put in the thumb screws, and the plastic's held neatly to the structure. When you have a solid frame greenhouse, you can then build the ends any way you want. I prefer to build them with big doors and vents. And I build my doors and vents using strapping, 2 1/4 inch wooden strapping. I clamp it over the plastic, having put a little sheet galvanized gusset in there, and then at each corner I'll alternate the way they lap, and it gives me a very nice strong structure. This big door is held on here with hinges with removable pins. If I want to swing the whole door up for ventilation, I can, or I can pull the pins and take the whole door off and store it if I want to use this at a time of year when it doesn't need all that extra heat protection. But most important is what you do up here in this area. I built a triangular door also on hinges because a greenhouse can overheat, and the best way to get rid of that heat is to let it out the top. Attached to this door on the inside is an automatic temperature-activated arm. When the temperature rises to 70 in the greenhouse, it expands and opens this vent. When the temperature goes below 70, it contracts and this vent closes. All that temperature moderation is done for me automatically, and the greenhouse never overheats. This greenhouse has one further unique feature. It moves, and it moves because the foundation, instead of being pipes driven into the ground permanently, is a skid with a beveled edge that the greenhouse sits on. So I can move it from one place to another. When it is in position, I drive a pipe in a number of places and bolt it to the pipe because I don't want it to move by way of the wind when I don't want it to. There are a lot of advantages to having a greenhouse that moves. Come on down here and I'll show you what they are. Once you get involved with small greenhouses, you'll find that there are actually 2 garden seasons. There's the standard summer season that we all know, and then there's also what I call the winter garden. And the winter garden is the area covered by one of these greenhouses. Now, the crops in here are crops that I planted toward the end of the normal growing season, and they're all hardy crops. They're all crops that I know will do well with some protection. And when the time came, when it got cool enough, I was able to just slide this greenhouse right on over to give them a layer of protection. I could have done the same thing with those little instant greenhouses that we just showed you how to put up, and I would have erected them over this area. And what that does is get me a single layer of protection over them, which is the equivalent of moving this covered area 1.5 USDA zones to the south, which means that the temperature in here will be 15 degrees warmer during the winter than it is out of doors. And that makes a great difference to the survival of these crops. They're all hardy, don't mind freezing. That little bit of extra protection really helps them. If it's going to get even colder than that, say in zones 6, 7, and 8, where a single layer of protection is usually enough, you can take some spun-bonded fabric like this and put it out over the bed on the really cold nights, and then you get even more protection in here and less stress on the plants. And if you live as we do in the really colder areas of the country, zones 3, 4, and 5, there's another way that you can put a second layer of protection on and absolutely guarantee that these hardy crops will be harvestable every day all winter. I'll show you how we do it. Hi.
Hi, Eliot. I'm harvesting all the rest of these summer peppers. I think the season's over for them.
Oh, I think it is. You know, one of the nice things about a greenhouse in our cool climate is that we can use this protection in the summer with the doors open to provide extra warm conditions for heat-loving crops. But its main use for the winter is that it gives us shelter for that second layer of protection over these cold frames here. We've planted these up ahead of time, the crops are all ready to go, and when the weather gets cold, we're going to put a layer of glass over here. That gives us the first layer of protection.
Now for our second layer of protection, we're simply going to move this whole greenhouse down over the cold frames. And that's going to get us 1.5 zones further south. Now, if you're wondering how a great big greenhouse like this can so simply slide like that, well, Eliot has all the construction details in his book, 4-Season Harvest, along with some planting schemes for these cold winter crops.
Now, this greenhouse and the cold frames are the final development of what I started with years ago with my first bowed piece of rebar. And I was so fascinated with the quality of vegetables that I got to harvest all winter long that I kept improving it and improving it. And I can guarantee you that if you give a try to building a small greenhouse and using it to extend your harvest right on through the winter, you're going to be just as delighted with it as we are.
And for now, goodbye and good gardening.